Picture this nightmare. It's 115 nights ago in Arizona. A delivery driver is struggling in the brutal heat. A child walking their dog is desperately thirsty. An elderly couple holding hands needs relief from the scorching sun. A kind neighbor puts out free cold water to help them survive. That neighbor gets fined $650 and faces a $50,000 lawsuit. This isn't from some dystopian movie. This isn't fiction. This is happening right now in America, where giving free water to people dying of heat has become a crime punishable by financial ruin. Meet David Martin from Goodyear, Arizona, a man whose simple act of human decency started a war with his HOA that would expose the dark heart of corporate control in American neighborhoods. His story will shatter everything you thought you knew about property rights, community spirit, and basic human compassion. David Martin isn't asking for much. He's not trying to get rich. He's not seeking fame. He's just a guy who makes custom sneakers in his garage and believes in taking care of his neighbors. For 5 years since 2020, David has done something so simple, so fundamentally human, that it should be celebrated. He puts a cooler of free cold water outside his home for anyone who needs it. It's for the kids, the delivery drivers, the couple holding hands walking down the street, David explains with the kind of genuine warmth that seems to be disappearing from American communities. It's for the little kid who has to walk his dog in the heat. This wasn't supposed to be controversial. In Arizona, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Celsius and heat kills more people than all other natural disasters combined, free water should be as normal as breathing. David was inspired by his grandfather, who turned his house into a community food pantry and taught him that neighbors take care of neighbors. The water cooler sits in David's driveway, a simple blue and gray container that he wheels inside every night and brings out fresh every morning. There's a sign encouraging people to stay hydrated, and he even includes a bowl of water for dogs. It's the kind of gesture that should restore your faith in humanity. But David Martin lives in Canyon, Trails Unit 4 West, managed by First Service Residential, and in corporate HOA America, human kindness is a violation that must be punished. The war began in 2024 when First Service Residential, the management company running David's HOA, decided that his 5-year act of kindness was suddenly a problem. The citations started arriving like bills from a predatory collection agency. $25 the first month, then escalating to $100 monthly for non-compliance. The HOA's justification would be laughable if it weren't so sinister. They claim David's water cooler violates rules about unsightly junk and advertising projects on lawns. Let that sink in. A cooler providing life-saving water in deadly heat is considered unsightly junk by corporate management. But here's where the story reveals the true nature of HOA tyranny. The management company, First Service Residential, doesn't object to David providing water. Their lawyer stated, "The association does not object to a resident providing water bottles within the community. However, the community's rules do not allow a resident to advertise water bottle distribution from a portable ice chest located next to their garage that is visible from neighboring property." Read that again? They don't object to providing water. They object to anyone being able to see that water is available. They want David to hide his kindness, to make it invisible, to ensure that people suffering in the heat can't easily access help. This isn't about community standards, it's about control. The fines have now reached $650 and continue climbing. David faces the same threat that haunts every HOA resident. If he doesn't pay, the HOA can place liens on his property and eventually foreclose on his home. A man could lose everything he's worked for because he dared to help people survive Arizona's killer heat. But something beautiful happened when David's story went public. His neighbors fought back. This isn't just one man against a corporate machine. It's an entire community rising up against tyranny disguised as property management. Rich Custas, David's neighbor, captured the bewilderment everyone feels. I have no idea why they are coming down on him. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. But David's neighbors didn't just express confusion. They took action. David started a petition to remove 3 HOA board members, and the response was overwhelming. He collected over 100 signatures from residents who were fed up with corporate management that prioritizes rules over human welfare. The petition revealed something crucial. David wasn't the only resident suffering under First Service Residential's reign of pettiness. On July 10, 2025, a special HOA meeting was held to vote on removing the 3 board members. What happened? Next was democracy in action. Out of 210 ballots cast, 190 residents voted to remove the board members who had enabled David's persecution. But here's where the story takes a dark turn that reveals how corporations fight back when residents dare to resist. The removed board members immediately claimed the vote was illegal, arguing there weren't enough signatures. Insufficient notice was given and questioning whether 210 votes constituted a quorum in a community of over 1,000 homes. Think about what this means. When residents overwhelmingly vote to remove corporate-friendly board members, those same board members simply refuse to accept the results. They're essentially saying that democracy doesn't apply when it threatens corporate control. David Martin isn't backing down. Faced with escalating fines and corporate retaliation, he's preparing for a legal battle that could cost up to $50,000. But here's what makes David's fight so inspiring. He's funding it through the same spirit of community that started this whole controversy. David has launched a t-shirt campaign through his custom sneaker business, Candyman Kicks. The shirts say, "Free, cold, water," on the front with an image of a bottle on the back, and every penny of profit goes toward his legal defense fund. He's turning his persecution into a rallying cry for community spirit over corporate control. I stand firm on the fact that I'm not paying the fines. The cooler is not going anywhere, and I'll fight it, David declared, with the kind of quiet determination that defines real American heroes. People have offered to help David pay the HOA fines, but he refuses that money. Instead, he says, "You can donate water. You can donate money that will go to water." Even while being persecuted for his kindness, David's focus remains on helping others rather than helping himself. The legal battle David faces represents something much larger than one man's fight to provide water. It's a test case for whether human compassion can survive in corporate-controlled America. If David loses, it sends a message to every HOA resident. Your kindness is unwelcome, your community spirit is a violation, and your human decency is subject to corporate approval. David's persecution has sparked something unprecedented, a neighborhood-wide rebellion against corporate control that's spreading far beyond Arizona. His neighbors aren't just supporting him, they're actively resisting the HOA's tyranny in beautiful and creative ways. Larry Marks, a neighbor who regularly stops by for water for himself and his dog, has become one of David's most vocal supporters. "I think it's fantastic," Larry says about the water stand, expressing what most decent humans feel about helping people survive deadly heat. But the support goes far beyond words. Neighbors have attended HOA meetings, signed petitions, and even started setting up their own water coolers in an act of coordinated civil disobedience. They're essentially telling First Service Residential, "If you want to fine one of us for kindness, you'll have to fine all of us." The community meeting where board members were voted out revealed the depth of resident anger at First Service Residential's management. People didn't just complain about the water cooler. They raised multiple issues about voices not being heard, problems not being addressed, and a general pattern of corporate indifference to resident needs. "I'm not the only one that sees there's something wrong in our community," David observed, and he's absolutely right. The water cooler became a symbol of everything wrong with HOA governance: arbitrary rules, corporate control, punishment for community spirit, and the transformation of neighborhoods into profit centers for management companies. First Service Residential's response to community resistance reveals the true nature of corporate HOA management. When faced with overwhelming resident opposition, they didn't reconsider their position. They doubled down on control and legal technicalities. The company's public statement is a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. They claim to support providing water while simultaneously fining David for making water visible and accessible. It's like saying you support feeding hungry people, but oppose letting anyone know where food is available. But the real corporate strategy became clear when the board members refused to accept their removal by resident vote. They're arguing that democratic processes don't apply when they threaten corporate interests. This reveals the fundamental lie of HOA governance. Residents are told they have control through board elections, but when they actually try to exercise that control, corporate lawyers find ways to invalidate their choices. First Service Residential manages thousands of HOA communities across the country, generating millions in revenue from management fees, violation fines, and legal actions against residents. David's water cooler represents a threat to this business model because it demonstrates that communities can solve problems through cooperation rather than corporate enforcement. The company's escalating fine structure, from $25 to $100 monthly, isn't about compliance. It's about revenue generation and punishment for resistance. They're essentially saying, pay us for the privilege of being kind, or we'll destroy your financial life. David Martin's persecution isn't isolated. It's part of a nationwide pattern of HOA attacks on basic human decency that reveals how corporate management has poisoned American communities. Across the country, residents are being fined, threatened, and harassed for acts of kindness that should be celebrated. The HOA industry has transformed from community self-governance into corporate profit extraction through systematic violation generation. Management companies like First Service Residential actively seek new ways to fine residents, turning every aspect of community life into potential revenue streams. But there's hope. States across America are fighting back with legislation to protect residents from corporate abuse. Minnesota is requiring HOA transparency and appeals processes. Arizona is cracking down on HOA budgets. Florida has restricted HOA control over resident property. Georgia, California, and Colorado are all implementing reforms to protect homeowner rights. These legislative efforts represent recognition that HOAs have become too powerful and too detached from the communities they claim to serve. The fact that lawmakers feel compelled to protect residents from their own HOAs reveals how completely the system has failed. David's story has become a rallying cry for these reform efforts because it perfectly illustrates the absurdity of corporate control over human kindness. If providing water to people dying of heat can be classified as a violation, then HOA power has no limits and no connection to genuine community welfare. David Martin's persecution isn't isolated. It's part of a nationwide pattern of HOA attacks on basic human decency that reveals how corporate management has poisoned American communities. Across the country, residents are being fined, threatened, and harassed for acts of kindness that should be celebrated. The HOA industry has transformed from community self-governance into corporate profit extraction through systematic violation generation. Management companies like First Service Residential actively seek new ways to fine residents, turning every aspect of community life into potential revenue streams. But there's hope. States across America are fighting back with legislation to protect residents from corporate abuse. Minnesota is requiring HOA transparency and appeals processes. Arizona is cracking down on HOA budgets. Florida has restricted HOA control over resident property. Georgia, California, and Colorado are all implementing reforms to protect homeowner rights. These legislative efforts represent recognition that HOAs have become too powerful and too detached from the communities they claim to serve. The fact that lawmakers feel compelled to protect residents from their own HOAs reveals how completely the system has failed. David's story has become a rallying cry for these reform efforts because it perfectly illustrates the absurdity of corporate control over human kindness. If providing water to people dying of heat can be classified as a violation, then HOA power has no limits and no connection to genuine community welfare. David Martin's water cooler is still there, providing free cold water to anyone who needs it. Every morning, David wheels it out. Every evening, he brings it in. Every day, he helps people survive Arizona's deadly heat, while corporate lawyers calculate new ways to punish him for his kindness. The cooler has become more than a source of hydration. It's a symbol of resistance against the corporate forces that are trying to eliminate human spontaneity from American communities. It represents the radical idea that neighbors should help each other without asking permission from management companies. David's legal battle continues, and he's preparing to spend up to $50,000 defending his right to provide water to thirsty people. Think about that. In modern America, a man might spend $50,000 for the privilege of helping his neighbors survive. But David isn't fighting alone. His neighbors support him. His community voted to remove the board members who enabled his persecution. People across the country are buying free cold water, T-shirts to fund his legal defense. And lawmakers in multiple states are working to prevent future David Martins from facing the same corporate persecution. It's not just about water, it's about the community as a whole, David says, capturing the true stakes of his fight. Will American communities be places where people help each other? Or will they be corporate-controlled spaces where kindness requires permission and human decency is subject to profit calculations? The answer depends partly on what happens to David Martin's water cooler. But it depends even more on whether Americans are willing to fight for communities based on cooperation rather than corporate control. David Martin gave us more than free water. He gave us an example of what it means to put human welfare above corporate compliance. His water cooler is still there, still providing relief from Arizona's brutal heat, still proving that kindness is possible even in corporate-controlled America. The question isn't whether David will win his legal battle. The question is whether we'll follow his example and choose community spirit over corporate submission. The water is still free. The choice is still ours. Subscribe to support David and others, fighting HOA tyranny. Share this story everywhere. Every American needs to see what happens when corporations attack human kindness. Comment. Would you support David Martin in your community? Have you seen similar HOA attacks on basic human decency? Your voice matters. Like this video if David Martin is your hero. Share with everyone who believes neighbors should help neighbors.